What's New 802? I'm Becca Hammond, and you're listening to Vermont Talks. Vermont Talks may include graphic or explicit content. Listener discretion is advised. Amy Klinger, you are a novelist, a freelance writer, a marketing communications professional, and you just finished your debut novel. When did you actually finish the novel?
I finished it probably about... Finished was probably about 4 years ago.
Okay.
4 years ago, and the process of getting it published just took a bit of time, and writing it took way longer.
I saw that. We'll loop around back to that one. I just wanted to check in because I hadn't seen the actual finish date on that.
Yeah.
And the title of the book is In Light of Recent Events. You moved to Vermont in 2000, and you're working on a second novel that is set in Vermont, which I'm very interested to talk about later.
Yep.
Okay, so in light of recent events, how long in total did this book take you to write?
If I were being totally honest, which I guess I will be since I brought it up, probably about 12 years. 10 years really writing it in very, very, hour-long increments in the evening after work, and then I had my daughter, and so doing family stuff, and so I would sit down in the evenings, like I said, usually for like an hour at a time, and then it just chipped away at it. It was kind of a labor of love for a very long time that I honestly didn't think would ever see the light of day, and so it's been a fun ride so far.
Yeah, that's great. And you write with such a clear, concise voice. I'm very impressed with your writing style. As soon as I read a few paragraphs, this is great. No wonder you have so many recommendations on the back cover of the book.
Yeah.
And on the Amazon page, I'm amazed how many 5-star reviews you have as well. Like, that's really impressive, especially when you're independently publishing books. That's really hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my day job is like you said, marketing and communication. So I've worked hard to kind of get it out, and your fingers are always crossed anytime anybody reads it. And I won't deny, like probably about, I don't know, a third to a half are people that know me and are being generous. But it's always like kind of an unexpected thrill when somebody I don't know actually likes the book and puts up a review. It's thrilling, actually.
I'm sure. Yeah. I don't discredit yourself if it's friends and family. I know people who've written books, and I did not give them a 5-star review, so don't worry about that. I would say is just from based on the first paragraphs, and I probably read the first chapter.
Yeah.
So, clearly, you're a very talented writer.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Swinging back to your earlier career and all of the other work you've done, because you're apparently a somewhat prolific writer, writing for work for yourself. It's impressive to do something for work and then do it on your free time as well. That it means you're pretty passionate about it. It gets draining.
Yeah.
So did I read that you're a copywriter? Is that right?
Yeah. At this stage, I've gone through a bunch of communications jobs, but at this point I'm sort of a combination brand strategist and copywriter. I do work for, an agency, and then I also have a few freelance clients, but it's all writing and using that part of my brain in my day job. But it's such a different experience writing fiction. It's such a wide open field versus these are the parameters for work that I have to,
right.
I have to speak to this audience. I have to have these messages, and
the message for brand writing is so concise and specific, and you have a the tone you're going for and exactly how you want to present yourself. Yeah. It's creative, but it's like a limited sort of creative. I do engineering for my trade, so I can appreciate that, where it's, okay, here is the exact set of things I need to complete in a very specific way, because there's a way you want to present each different brand. I can see how that's a lot different than writing fiction for a novel. Do you enjoy the fiction writing a lot more, or do you find that you enjoy both sides of it, and it's just kind of up to the day and your mood?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up engineering, because I sort of, through the process of writing In Light of Recent Events, I really kind of thought of it as, the equivalent of somebody who has an antique car that they work on in the garage, and it's just it's something that they do. It's still, like in your case, if it were engineering, it's still using the skills that you have, but using it in a much different way. And so, I don't know that I'm answering your question, but I think the fiction writing is just so freeing. I mean, not entirely, because you still have to plot it out, and I still know where the story needs to go, but the path of getting there is, I don't know, it's just a lot more like play than it is work. Although I will say that when you're writing, when you have different clients, you do have to get into the quote unquote character of their brand. So again, it's using the same muscles and, but doing it in a to me, much more satisfying and fun way.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So we've got to talk a little bit about the details in the book. We won't get too in depth. And I wanted to mention that you did a VPR interview and incredible interview. I did go through that entire interview, and I was amazed how in depth they get. And especially since you're both writers, I think that the interaction of two writers getting very in depth about your work and the tone that you set was really impressive. So if you want a very in depth coverage of the book and the details within the book and characters, and I would check out the VPR podcast. We kind of keep it loose on Vermont.
Absolutely.
Talks. So I will point people that way. That's totally, power to VPR journalists. That was an incredible interview. And
that was fun.
They have many, many good interviews as well. So power to those guys. So 90s office culture. This is one thing I really wanted to talk about because it's a very unique, I don't think there's a huge amount of novels, especially being written today, about 90s office culture that's so specific, and especially from a woman's perspective. Yeah. What inspired you? And clearly you held on to this idea for a very long time and you wanted to bring it to fruition.
Yeah.
What was it and why?
Well, I mean, you kind of hit on it. It was over the course of many job changes, many different office environments. I actually started, my first job out of college was at a publishing house in academic publishing very much. I wouldn't say that this book relies on that setting any more than for the framework, for the structure and the office hierarchy, which was a big thing there and in several other places that I worked. I was so intrigued by this very strict unspoken protocols of the office environment, and particularly in corporate environments where this level of person never gets to speak to the highest level of person. You always have to go up through the channels, and it's just such a weird dynamic. But in every place that I worked, you find your people. You find it's a group of people that are just thrown together by, I won't say coincidence, but it's skills and interests. But they're not people that you would choose to spend 8+ hours a day with necessarily. And so you find your people. And I found that a really intriguing topic to work with. And of course, I mean, my earliest jobs were in the 90s and formed a lot of my thinking. And there are pieces that do end up in the story. Every experience I've had at a trade show has not been a pleasant one. And so that makes an appearance in the book at some point. So the dynamics of that culture, particularly in a time in the 90s when technology was just starting to become a thing. I mean, I can remember having my first email account and just trying to wrestle with what that meant, being able to send things electronically to people rather than having to get up and walk over to a desk. And it was just a rich territory for exploring in a lot of ways.
That's very interesting. Are you freelance working now, or are you in that sort of corporate environment?
No, I left that quite happily, that environment, a while ago. And now I work out of my home office and for clients. And like I said, a small agency actually out in Ohio, Boulder Creative, that's a super group of people, but we've only met in person once. So that difference between going into the office every day and again, like I said, finding your people and having lunch and, gossip and all that stuff to where I am now, where I'm working with people that I've only met once. I see them every day virtually. And we form different kind of bonds. It's a really, having seen that spread over the course of years, it's just such a dramatic change in a lot of ways. Not better or worse, just different.
Interesting. Do you notice the hierarchy is still an issue? I would imagine in a situation where you can't physically see someone, where you're walking through a hallway, you can't really just Zoom call the higher ups.
Yeah.
Myself in earphones. You can't just casually Zoom call someone 2 tiers above you in management, I guess. I've never worked from home where I like full home office setup where you just are totally remote and you've never really, like you said, you've never met them.
Yeah.
It's sometimes hard. Is it hard to gauge that hierarchy, or do you find that you know about it, but you're isolated?
It's less so with the agency that I work for. It's a very collaborative, fluid group. There's not that hierarchy. I mean, there's the owner of the company, but it doesn't feel like that. I have other clients where that structure, kind of bigger clients where that corporate structure is in place, and you very much know who you go to for information and who you ask to go to someone else for information. And so, I wouldn't say that, in some ways, I would suspect that the corporate culture has changed in some ways and not changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I'm sure it's really dependent on the company, because some companies are just fantastic and some companies are so locked into it's so rigid. It's such an old way of thinking that came from, what do you think about it? I think about like the fat cat guy with the cigar and, they were like slapping the woman's ass. That was like the culture in the 50s.
Yeah.
And it got carried through to the point where now it's weird. Like people that never grew up in that sort of misogynistic, weird society are kind of being pushed in companies like that. And it's like, that's a whole new experience for some people. Some people, it's totally normal. Like this has been their whole life still, but we're at a very strange time because the 90s was the start of the change, but I think we're still changing constantly. Like our work culture's so weird right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, as I was writing the book, I wasn't conscious of a lot of things. I was just enjoying the characters and having fun with it. And when the book got published and I had to actually think about talking about it and going back and thinking about the themes and whatnot, I discovered that I was really working a lot of stuff out with being a woman in a culture that really was, the hierarchy was very masculine and the glass ceiling was a very real thing. And so the main character, Audrey, is in middle management and, has this feeling of like, well, I'm good at my job, but I'm not good enough. And so I'm just going to be mediocre on it. She actually says that I've just decided I'm going to be mediocre at my job. And I had to think about like, well, where did that come from me? And I did, there were situations in my professional life where there were opportunities to rise up in the ranks. And almost every time somebody, a man was brought in for the position that I was really next in line for. And despite, getting great reviews and it just felt like, okay, well, I'm good, but I'm not good enough. So, And I think that's some of what Audrey feels in the story, but she doesn't look at it as anything other than, I just go in and do my job and then I come home every day and I have the people that I'm close to and they help me get through the day kind of thing.
Right. So, which is kind of sad in many ways, right? Like that's the, the norm in the society. And it's that's a fact for so many women. And still today, a fact for so many women. I know of someone, I won't get into details, but the phrase, you have the wrong plumbing for the job was used. And it hurts, and I can't speak to her experiences in her life, obviously, but as, just that camaraderie you feel for other women in the workforce that you see being mistreated, that it's still happening. It still happens in, 2020. It's still happening today. So it's important to talk about that kind of thing because a lot of people, especially men, don't realize. They just don't see that. Yeah, that's totally inappropriate to bring in because they'll bring in a brand new person and promote them over a woman who's done the job for 10 years. Right. And that story has been told thousands and thousands of times. It's so normal to hear about. it's not okay. Like, that's not okay. That's why a lot of people don't stay at these jobs.
Right.
Like, why would you do that to yourself? It's not worth the paycheck in some ways if you can go find a different one. Yeah. This is fascinating. I really wanted to get at the heart of why you wanted to write a book about that culture, because it's so interesting. I mean, we all love like The Office, right? Like, there's a lot of people who are so embedded in office culture that it's something we do talk and think about, but not always in some of these more interesting, in-depth ways. Like, it's not as funny, right? Like, why is she so stuck in this position?
Yeah. Now, she doesn't end up, not by circumstances, make it so that she gets unstuck. So it, and I those may be the undercurrent themes, but ultimately it's a pretty fun and funny book, I think, in the way that, the show The Office poked fun at a lot of the absurdities of office culture. That certainly, I hope, shines through in this book too. So
good. Oh, definitely. Yes. And the first couple, I won't mention exactly what it was, but you had me giggling very quickly. Something very 90s related. Yeah. I don't think we really touched on this. So your writing process, how different is the process? Because like you said, you have to plan the plot. You have to obviously finish the book. Like, you can't just write for fun forever.
Yeah.
How different was that versus the more corporate, like the plan for a corporate branded process versus something fun for you?
Yeah, deadlines are a big part of that. When a client needs something and you just have to get it done versus, this other book that like I said, I wasn't confident it was ever going to get out in the world. So the process of writing in light of recent events is a little different from the book that I'm writing now. So I have a 2-book contract with the Story Plant, an independent fiction house. And so this next book, I've had to really pick up the pace on. I couldn't, you obviously can't take another 10 years to write a book. So the process of writing this book has been a lot different. I kind of went into it with a solid plot and structure and knew where I wanted to go. And
did you already have the idea for the book when they said, 2-book contract?
Yes and no. They basically said, we really like the first book, but we like to bring new authors to market. So if this is your only book, good job, but we'll pass. But if you have another book, we'd love to keep talking. I said, actually, I have a collection of short stories that are exploring, the changing dynamics of Vermont and, steering away. And I got very kind of academic and geeky about it. And they said, oh, no, I don't think that's what we had in mind.
No. Oh, no, because that sounds interesting.
And so the publisher basically said, why don't you, this was over Thanksgiving in 2019, maybe, I think it was. Okay. And so he said, why don't you think about it over Thanksgiving break? And, we're not saying you have to write the same book, but if you're trying to build a market, you kind of want people to recognize, and short stories, if you're not a famous person, they really probably won't sell very well. So think about it. So I actually took one of the short stories, and the one that I felt had most structure to it, and I blew it out into a novel size story. So it's basically a 3-part story, and I'm drafting part 3 right now, and that's basically what the short story was going to be. So I had to go back and build the backstory.
Interesting.
So it's been a different process, but it's been fun, especially writing it in Vermont instead of having to try to remember New Jersey of my roots. Now that I've been in Vermont for 20 years, a little over 20 years.
I'm sure. Yeah, I have many questions, but yeah, Jersey to Vermont, I'm sure there's a bit, especially corporate culture. That's going to be wildly different because we're corporate, but we're much more relaxed here than I would imagine in New Jersey.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, congrats on the 2-book contract.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
Thanks.
What was the process like to find the publisher? Because you finished the book in 2018, you said?
Something like that.
Yeah. 2018-ish. And then you went and you found the publisher. What? Yeah. And you were marketing yourself? Were you just using the internet? Were you calling people?
Well, it was a little different. So the normal process that most people take is they spend time trying to find the agent, and then the agent will go connect with. They generally work with the big publishers. So my timeline is totally off because it took me. I spent about a year and a half what they call querying agents, and basically making the pitch and saying, this is my book, this is what it's about, this is who the market's for. And I got a lot of very polite rejections, some encouraging rejections that said, this isn't right for me, but come back. And it got pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you know what? I know people who've self-published. Maybe I'll go down that route. And I found a friend to work with on the cover, and talked to another friend who had self-published about what the process is. And the day that I had that conversation with her, I thought, one thing I haven't done is look at independent publishers and see who will take queries without an agent,
Yep.
just directly from the author. And I did some research. I found one that seemed to be a good fit based on what I saw they published. And that was the Story Plant. And I sent the query the next morning. They said, yep, send us a full manuscript. And then a month later, they said, yep, that was when I had the conversation about the contract. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
I was curious about that because I'd read independent publishing. And I didn't really understand what the difference was between a regular publisher and someone independent. I didn't realize they wouldn't even take a manuscript from an author at a large publishing house. That's interesting. See, this process
they won't even
is so isolated to a lot of the normal public doesn't realize that's how hard it is to get your voice heard.
Yeah, and a lot of writers don't realize. I mean, it was a learning process for me. I leaned on people who had been through the process. I took a course on, on basically how to write that pitch letter, because it's very, very particular, and you have to have it in this specific order.
And as soon as they see something, that they don't like,
Yeah.
they probably just throw it in that pile, because I'm sure there's probably thousands and thousands of people sending these letters every day.
Yeah. They get massive, massive amounts of pitches, and you're right. It just takes the slightest thing to, I once spelled, the agent's name wrong. And
oh, no.
I'm sure that did not go over well. But.
Right. Because that's it. It's almost like when you think of the poor people who work in academics and they're going through applications at Harvard.
Yeah.
And there's thousands of them in front of you, and you only get to pick 50.
Right.
The second something's off, there's a smudge on this paper. I'm going to toss this one to the left. I can imagine the struggle there. That sounds very hard. But independent publisher, I love independent companies. This is kind of an independent podcast where, whatever on the commercial industry that's gotten way too complex in so many different facets of our lives. Whatever to them, if I can make a book, okay, I'm a publisher now.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really interesting. And it's nice that they were responsive and got back to you quickly.
Yeah.
And you've had a good experience working with them all through. What was editing like? Were they a lot of back and forth, or were they just happy from the start?
Well, I mean, I like to believe, so this book went through, in light of recent events, went through a lot of rounds of edits, over the course of many years, and reviewers, and so I like to think that once it got to them, it was in pretty good shape. And so the feedback that came back was really, I think there was one structural change that had to be made, and one character development piece. But for the most part, it was pretty light, and the story is super close to what I submitted, which was great. I don't think that's going to be the case with this next book. It's a little bit more dense, and the timeline is much shorter, and so it probably won't be as polished as the first one.
Right. Well, yeah, you're not taking the 12 years yourself.
Exactly. Yes. More like 2. It was supposed to be 1, but I've gotten a grace period from them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the pandemic, I feel like the whole world kind of stopped in the weirdest way, and now everyone's picking back up, and everyone's picking back up at light speed. It seems like everyone's super busy this summer. We're getting a lot done. It's great. But I feel like a grace period is definitely acceptable. All people in all walks of life in regards to the pandemic. Yeah. Okay, so the second book. Can I ask any more detail? I don't want to get too in-depth in it, but it's set in Vermont, and it's based on one of the short stories. So we know, we kind of talked about the office culture for the 90s. What's this one about?
So this one is sort of about finding home. I mean, for me, I grew up in New Jersey. I went to Salt Lake City for grad school and lived 6 years in Utah. And then was my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, we decided we met, excuse me, we met in Salt Lake, but he was from Brooklyn, and we're the two East Coasters out in Utah, and we decided to move closer to family, but not too close. So Vermont was kind of had the outdoors and whatnot, and so so in many ways, that process of moving to Vermont and sort of learning the culture and learning how to be here was really fascinating to me. I had people, when we moved out to the country, moved out to Richmond. I shouldn't say that. It's country-ish.
Compared to
New Jersey,
Brooklyn
compared to
Salt Lake City, yeah.
Yeah. So all the kind of knowledge that you pick up from, like, when do you order firewood? What time of year do you order firewood, greenwood? And, what are the seasonal aspects that how do you plant a garden? All this kind of information about that you learn from people around you, and you learn about the culture, and it really becomes it gets under your skin. It becomes like, I don't think I could live anywhere else at this point. Vermont is home for me. And so this is the story of, he's an artist named Reuben Downs. He's a sculptor and painter. And he finds himself in Vermont. Circumstances find himself in Vermont, and he decides to make it his home. And he meets a lot of characters along the way. He joins a rural pickup co-ed softball league. And so there's a rich cast of characters from there. And just as he's starting to sort of get his space and feel like it's his home, he does something that, kind of puts him into the spotlight and upends things in pretty uncomfortable ways. So I won't go into too much detail about it. But...
Yeah, that was a great overview. I was going to say, this sounds like I'm already invested in this story. I really want to know what happens, but cut it off there. You're going to leave them wanting more.
Yep.
No, this is great. It's been really great to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Is there anything else you'd like to share? You've got a website, amyklinger.com, and you've got an Instagram account, amyklinger_writer.
Yep.
I don't know if you want to promote anything else specific. Oh, besides, you did a VPR podcast, which was fantastic. Everyone should check that one out as well. Anything else you'd like to share today, though?
No, I just, I love hearing from people who've read the book. And so if anybody reads it, enjoys it, my email is on my site. And honestly, that's kind of why I do it, is sharing stories and that I know I enjoy, and that I hope other people enjoy. So, but it was great talking with you, Becca. I really had a blast.
It's been fantastic. So before we go, I need to make sure, where should they buy your book from? Where is the best place for people to buy your book?
I'm a big supporter of local independent bookstores. Phoenix Books in Burlington has been great. They hosted my book launch, and Bridgeside Books in Waterbury was also super great. We had an event down there, a Q&A with audiences. So
that's great.
Local and independent. It's also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and the usual suspects. But
which, if they're going to leave you a review, is it on Amazon? Is that the best place to put one?
That or Goodreads is another great place.
Perfect.
And really any local bookstore can order the book. It's available through their distributors.
So. But we got to leave you good reviews so that whenever
that would be great.
Anyone else comes across the book, they'll be more prompted to buy the book and read the book.
And it helps with the algorithms. Everybody with those you might also like that all those reviews kind of help push that up to serve up to other people. So
so check the book out. Go look for the book locally. I love that you can find it right in town. It's so nice to not have to ship it here, right?
It's true, although they will ship. I can tell you that.
Even more convenient. Perfect. So there's no downside at all. Okay, thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.
If you want to check out the show notes for today, they're going to be at vermonttalks.com/32. Thanks so much for listening to the end of the show. Subscribe to Vermont Talks on your favorite podcasting platform. You can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all over the web. Contact Becca at vermonttalks.com if you'd like to be interviewed or if you know someone who should be. Thanks so much to Jason Baker for creating the show music. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Vermont Talks. Any content or statements provided by our guests are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, anyone, or anything. And that's what was new in the 802. Have a great day.